Pranamami. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm just sitting down. I had some time this morning, so I was going to talk about 4 things that we all need to know, and we all need and want, and that we're all responsible for. So 4 things about life, 4 things about us, 4 things about reality. So, of course, I'm always speaking from a perspective on the world, a cosmology, if you will, that is Indian, Vedic, Sanskriti in origin. And so basically in that perspective, everything is one. So there's one world, one entity, one person. And so that is like an absolute perspective, that everything is absolute. In other words, everything is like, part of one large entity, object, subject, so on as one. Now, one thing is there. And then within that one thing, we can understand it. There's, in Vedic thought and Sanskrit thought, there's 4 aspects to things, and especially to people, that are important in understanding how to be successful in the pursuit of happiness. So first of all, there's a premise that says Anandamayo Bhyasat, that the living entity is Ananda Maya. It's made of the Maya, the stuff that the living being is made of is Ananda, or bliss. And so therefore what it seeks is of that same nature. And so there's 4 what are called the Purusha-Arthas. So the Purusha, person, Artha, that which is necessary for the person, things that are desirable, right, to get that which is of the ultimate desire. So 4 things, and they're not necessarily separate things. They're 4 ways of looking at the same thing, 4 aspects of the same thing. So they are, those of you who know anything of Sanskrit thought will know Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So we'll, just for abbreviation's sake, we'll summarize Dharma as being the intrinsic nature of a thing, its characteristic qualifying attributes, which then dictate that it will behave, it must behave, it should behave, it wants to behave in a certain way. It has, therefore, a certain right and wrong and good and bad that are specific to its nature, its defining qualities and attributes, right, that are unchanging no matter what its external behavior may be. And that basic nature dictates right, wrong, or good or bad for that entity, that person. So that's Dharma, the first part. And then Artha, because of that Dharma, that basic, unchanging, specific nature, the defining qualities of that person, there's specific needs that'll be there for that person, for that entity, to get what is ultimately desirable to them. So because I'm a certain way, I have specific types of desires, right, stemming from those values. And therefore, the needs that I have in order to attain those types of goals will be unique to me as well. So that's Artha, the means, right? The things that I need, right? So it's kind of like money, like wealth, right? The wealth isn't the thing you want. The wealth is the means to get that which you want. So whatever is wealth as defined by my Dharma, that is Artha, the means that get that which is truly desirable to me, defined as who I am. Then Kama are the actual desires themselves. You can say the goals, the desires, the objects, that I see as the fruit that I'm looking for to eat, that will, give me the nourishment that I want, that's specific to me. And so different varieties of people will have different types of things that sustain them, that nourish them, that give them a sense of pleasure, of satisfaction, of balance, and so on, and allow them to develop and grow. So they nourish them, they sustain them. So this is the kama, desire, right? And so we can observe that all different beings and all different kinds of bodies, right, they have different types of fruit that they look for, right? And in all characters, the types of food they look for, right? The types of shelter they look for, right? The types of sexual union they look for, right? So the eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, and these basic things will appear in different forms. So the kama, the desire, the object of desire, will appear in different ways, again depending on the dharma, the intrinsic nature. And then they'll need different arthas in order to get that kama. And then moksha is the last of the fourth here that we're going to think about. And that is sometimes translated as freedom, sometimes translated as liberation. But it's basically your ultimate attainment. So once I've managed to satisfy the kama, I'm expert at recognizing kama and getting arthas, everything according to my dharma, and the dharma is basically therefore now allowed to nourish, develop, and grow. It will reach a point of fruition in which that dharma, right, actually become my form, my body, and so on, actually becomes a true reflection of my mature dharma. So that's a swarupena yavastitaha, right, that I've attained my true form. Then you can say this is like a moksha, right, the final beatitude. Some people translate out, so a nice one. So these are the four things that everybody, right, wants or needs, everyone should know about, and also that we're all responsible for, we're all kind of answerable to, because being born, especially as human people, right, as opposed to animal people, may not be faced with these, responsibilities and choices and considerations that are just inherent in this form, that compels us to consider the morality, the right and wrong, the good and bad of our choices and so on. And therefore lead us to choose, artha, means, or things that we use to get what we want, that are actually serving our real dharma. So let's think about some different ways of looking at dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So, right, dharma, ethics, morality, right, wrong, good or bad, right, what we should do, the way we should behave, what's good for us, what's bad for us, and what's ultimately good, what's ultimately bad. These are all kind of considerations that we're all faced with, that we're responsible to deal with one way or another. Even if we ignore it, we're still ignoring it. It's in the room, it's with us. And the way we relate to this dharma, this moral question, in each circumstance will impact us, whether we face it in an intelligent, thoughtful way, actually, considering, right, or just trying to ignore it. We will basically, be getting the reactions of how we relate to our own dharma. So what is right and wrong, or good or bad, in any ordinary context is, even in the English language, right, what is good for something, bad for something, you can't think about it on its own. What's good? You always have to say what's good for something. It always has to be a consideration connected to something, right? So it's a consideration actually of artha. It has to be good for what? Dharma. So once you know what we're considering, what something can be good for, or who something can be good or bad for, then we can consider what is good, right, in terms of that person. Now, when we start considering what is good for everybody, then we can start to understand what is absolute good, right? But that's never going to take the same form, right? So it is one thing, dharma, morality itself, right? That is good for everybody. But that morality, what is good, what is bad, what is desirable or undesirable for everybody, is going to take a unique shape, not only depending on my particular nature, predilections, values. But then also, depending on the level of evolution that I'm at, and successfully knowing, when this is the Dharma part, is just even knowing those values, Artha, then being able to get what I need in consideration of those values in order to get the kama, the fruit that is desirable based on my nature, my dharma. And then, once I'm able to do that as an ongoing process, to have that whole process then bring me to a position of maturation and full fructification as a person, right? So the dharma will take its different forms and shapes, right, depending on the individual, right, but then also the circumstance the individual is in. The circumstance externally, right? There's a country I'm in, there's a time and place that I'm in, it's day, it's night, it's, whatever century it is and how your culture counts time, and many things in the environment externally, but also the internal situation, right? How have I matured or not matured in a personal / spiritual sense, right? So once I get to know my dharma more, right, then the good and bad will change itself. Although my nature hasn't changed, it's just become more mature, more richly developed. So dharma, right and wrong, or good or bad, is a very powerful, interesting concept then. It doesn't presuppose, it at once presupposes an absolute dharma and a relative dharma. They're both part of dharma itself. So to know dharma, right, this thought process basically says that we should know dharma in these two ways, both as it is absolutely and as it is relatively for each individual. So it's the same thing for everybody, but in its sameness is included a unique difference. That is us. So dharma. Artha, right, is another interesting word, and usually people may think about wealth is a very common way to translate artha, right? And there's a whole section of thought, called Artha Shastra, which talks about how, like, for kings and governments and so on like this, and any organization really, how to get, acquire, keep, sustain wealth, right? Artha. And it basically puts, if we have artha as our main value, that we're organizing everything else around and putting that as the predominant value, then how must we make our decisions and choices? Because as that right way of thinking says, by artha, by having means, I can get whatever I need and whatever I want. And so we should put artha first. That's the way that sort of thought goes. Right. So, but artha has, English obviously is another language. So the whole way of thinking from the Sanskrit perspective is a little different. So we can use a number of words and perspectives to kind of convey what is artha really. Just like dharma, we had like this internal aspect and external aspect. Internally, it's absolute, it's one, there's one morality, right? Which, is just who we are and what we are. Ananda, we seek pleasure by nature. So the dharma of living entities is to be in a state of happiness, pleasure, right? Bliss. And then, but then the behavior of dharma, what is right and wrong, therefore, right, is therefore to do things that will beget bliss, which means, happy relationships with the people around and so on. But that will depend on my specific dharma, my specific nature, my way of being. So that's dharma. Now, artha means, means by which I can get something, any means. My language is means, my body is means, my identity itself, the name that I have, right? The human form that I have, right? All of it is means, and everything attached to that. They're all means by which I get things which are desirable to me. So then, artha also, in terms of language, we can take a perspective. Artha is meaning. So how we use a word any word in a language, right, has a meaning inside of the language. It doesn't have a meaning outside of the language. It only has a meaning inside of the language. So artha also means meaning. Meaning requires context, right? So this is another way of looking at artha. So wealth, or that which is desirable, also requires context. So even if we're talking about it in terms of money, money requires economy. If I have gold, it's not universally valuable. If you go to an aardvark, they will not recognize your gold as very valuable to them. You will not win over the aardvark's affection by your lump of gold in your hand. So artha requires a context. So according to my dharma, my nature, my specific qualities that define me as a person, that's my nature, will make a specific thing, a specific set of things, a specific type of things, artha, meaningful, valuable. So this is meaning, right, that people are looking for, that can be known once we know something about, right, purpose, dharma, right, that makes things good or bad. Then we think about the artha, that which is valuable to that context, right? So then kama, that which is desirable, right? That the type of fruit, right? The type of food the human body can subsist on, and not just subsist on, but thrive on, and so on, the desirable fruit. You can eat many things, but that which is actually desirable, and in every way, right? So the animals, different animals will eat different kinds of foods, right? And the humans will eat different kinds of foods. And so each, in the terms of food, there's a particular kind of nourishing, right, naturally occurring food that will be good. And so kama can be understood in that way. That which is desirable, that which satisfies, nourishes, gives pleasure, right, to the being, to the person, depending on their specific nature or way of being. So that is kama. Kama is most popularly and commonly associated with like sex pleasure, sense pleasure, things like that, right, which bring a sense of joy and satisfaction, right, on a very deep level, emotionally and physically and personally, all at once. So there's something that deeply connects dharma to, right, that sense of pleasure there inside of the sexual union because of the personal intimacy that it can afford. However, if it's, out of touch with dharma, right, then it can actually, it can temporarily be some type of pleasure, but in the long term, it can take a different form. So just like anything that tastes good in the beginning, but it brings us, some undesirable effects in the long term, right, that was in some ways aligned with our dharma in a short-term way, but in a long-term way, not aligned with our dharma, it will bring some unpleasant effects, from the perspective of dharma, right? So we can go into detail, obviously, in any one of these anyway, but let's move on to moksha then again. So there's kind of second round around everything. Moksha. So once we have gotten to some degree, right? Some degree, a motion of we're able to get some means, able to acquire desirable fruits, right, based on our dharma, and our dharma is therefore being nourished. Some growth is occurring, right? Then development. If there's nourishment, there is development, right? More specificity will start to manifest itself, right? What was unmanifest, but still, right, inherent as potential in the being, in the person, in the object, will become manifest, right, will become explicit, and will then make the whole cycle of artha and kama, right, working with the dharma, more rich, more specific, right, and more felt, more seen, more known as well. And so the cycle, right, exponentially increases as all these levels, right, develop and nourish. And so there's a natural way we could, envision this as just like a baby in the womb gradually growing, not only inside the womb, but then outside the womb and so on. So, right, because all of life has the same cycle of these 4 stages that we're using to look at that cycle of life. So in a basic structural way, right, we can look at the moksha, the final of the 4th, right, concept here, as the final beatitude. So everything, every object, right, has a success that will be seen when it is successfully used for the purpose that it was created for, that it has found its place. It's, so, in the last couple talks, I'm usually drinking tea when I, give one of, haven't been going online lately and talking here and there. And, when I have a cup, it's been made and I have purchased it for the specific purpose of, right, drinking beverages inside of it. So if it just sat on my shelf and I never used it, right, I had the Artha, right, I had the Dharma, the inclination that gave me an inclination, right, that said it's good to get a cup to drink things in because I like to drink things, so I get the cup. But if it just sits on the shelf unused, I had the Artha, the means, but I didn't use it by making tea in it, right, to get the kama, the satisfaction, then I would never, right, complete that cycle and get the nourishment of all those 3 things triangulated, Dharma, Artha, Kama. So the Dharma, Artha, Kama, right, can make this cycle. It's more like, even more than a cycle, you can think of it like an ascension, like a circular corkscrew type of, right, ascension, a spiral, if you will. Because it is going in a circle, right? Dharma, Artha, Kama, they all serving each other to keep this, momentum developing. But it's going up, it's ascending, it's evolving. And it's like a pyramidic type of, spiraling happening that develops up towards the final beatitude. So, right, using the cup again and again, I can reach this position of, wow, I've fully enjoyed this cup. I know this cup. I have this relationship with the cup. And now for the rest of my life, I'll have this memory of the cup. And now even every other cup that I drink from, right, this cup, the intimate relationship I form with this cup will, inject and fuse and inspire the relationship I have with every other cup and so on. So there's a moksha, right, a final beatitude, a freedom, right? So moksha, right, the final beatitude, the full fruition, right, that's achieved in any particular object being engaged in an act that brings about the specific type of pleasure, satisfaction, right, and enjoyment that has the potential to give according to our Dharma. Right, so that's basically the gist, right, of the Dharma, the 4 things that we have to deal with, right? What is our Dharma? We have, to some degree, all of us have some notion, some idea, that is, about something that exists. So there's the way we see a thing that really, there's something that exists, which is the way we are, what we are, right, as a living being. What is a living being? What constitutes us as a living being and all living beings? To some degree or another, we're all faced with this question, and we are answering this question to whatever degree we are answering it. So the truth of Dharma is there, and there's our perspective on that, of what we are. That then makes us perceive our duty, what is good for us, bad for us, right for us, wrong for us, according to that level at which we are able to conceive of, or in other words, translate our experience of ourselves into a usable concept, a working model. right? To then translate that into, okay, in this particular situation in my environment, therefore, good, bad, right, and wrong, right, works this way in the world. So we're all responsible. We have to we are facing these things. And so therefore, these four things are the things that are desirable to know about. Right? It doesn't mean necessarily these concepts and these words have to be used to know these things. However, these are very useful concepts and words to enter into the understanding of these, things that we must know, that we do know to some degree or another. And the more that we know these things, whether in this language or another, we will get the knowledge that is needed and wanted by all living beings, because all living beings want pleasure, enjoyment, and in pursuance of our ultimate fulfillment as a living being. So I encourage myself, by encouraging you, I'm encouraging myself to ask questions about these things and answer the questions that we have about these things. And the very question itself, modeled in these ways, right? Recognizing that this is a thing that is of very keen, specific interest, universal interest to me as a person and to all people, to all beings, that will enhance everything I do, right? That will enhance my very self by helping me to develop and grow as a living being. These questions are very valuable and useful, and I hope some of the thoughts on these things that I've shared here are valuable and useful. And of course, we've only touched upon some of the external parts so that we can just understand some of the structure, what these things basically are. We haven't really applied them in the multitude of depths that these concepts can be applied. Okay, so we've just kind of said, okay, if we want to know a being or a thing or a person, we want to know ourselves basically, and what constitutes, in four ways of looking, right? What we are, therefore what is right and wrong for us, what is the things we need to get the things that we want, and to bring us to that place of full, right, fruition, right, and success in life. I hope that has made some things clear. Next time we can talk a little bit more about the different depths, which all of course start from the Dharma. The deeper we can define, right, by experience of course, but concepts help us to get to deep levels of experience. We can bring some more concepts that help us to go to deeper levels of experiencing self, Atma, in order to get deeper levels of Dharma. Right, so here's the first piece, and I hope it serves you as it has me. Jai Shri Krishna. Pranamami just means my respects for those of you who don't know. Pranamami. See you next time.